Now, please welcome the nicest guy in the Midwest, possibly the nation, Dr. Dan Bergen, Senior Advisor to the President at MSOE, to introduce our speaker.
Oh my gosh, that's very nice, Saj. Thank you. So I have to say, as I was preparing these comments, I did practice them this morning with my 9 and my 10-year-old kids, and I went through them while we were eating breakfast, and they said, "Wow, there's a lot of big words in that." So I want to jump in here and introduce Dr. Jeremy Kedziora. So he's the Pieper Power Endowed Chair in Artificial Intelligence at the Milwaukee School of Engineering, as well as an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science and Software Engineering. He's also an award-winning researcher and scientist with 17 years of experience in developing new methods in machine learning, Bayesian inference, and game theory. Prior to joining MSOE, he was the director of data science and analytics at Northwestern Mutual, where he managed the development of machine learning and modeling efforts that were focused on cybersecurity. Prior to that, Kedziora led product development at financial tech startup Giant Oak, where he focused on natural language processing. He's also served for 9 years the Central Intelligence Agency as a chief methodologist, where he led applied R&D efforts in data science and modeling. He holds a PhD in political science from the University of Rochester and a BS in chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's also taught at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and MSOE, and serves as an advisor to multiple fintech startups. So that's a bit of his sort of academic resume, his background. But I also want to share just a very brief story with you all about my initial interaction with Dr. Kedziora, because I think it really captures his service above self mindset. He and I first met for coffee when he joined our campus in 2023. And during that conversation, we discussed his time at the CIA and his research, as well as our families. He has a 7 and an 11-year-old as well. They all live in Whitefish Bay. And during the conversation, he shared an idea about utilizing some of his endowed funding to support a community-oriented AI hackathon. So right out of the gates, he was very focused on how he might leverage his gifts and his talents to serve our broader community. After a few follow-up meetings with students and key stakeholders, Hacksgiving, AI for Good, was created, and it's named for its occurrence the weekend before Thanksgiving. The Hacksgiving Hackathon offers students an opportunity to use their skill sets to give back to the community by developing an AI-driven solution to support a local nonprofit. So the first was the Next Step Clinic, and the second most recently was Discovery World. The growth of the program in just the first 2 years has been amazing. I'm very grateful to Dr. Kedziora for the incredible impact he's had on our students, our MSOE campus, and our Milwaukee community. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeremy Kedziora, a brilliant guy with a servant heart who's best described by big words. So.
That makes me sound far more impressive than I actually am. So I appreciate that, Dan, very much. So, well, I don't know how many folks remember me, but I was here speaking at the Rotary Club back in the summer of 2023, and I tried to offer a what is AI kind of intro right at that time. So first of all, let me say thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to come back and talk again. I'll do something a little different this time. This time I want to offer a few predictions about where I think artificial intelligence is going to go, in the next little while. I think maybe these go beyond 2025, but at the very least, I think you can expect, this to hold through 2025. And it'll be far less ominous than my first kind of slide suggests. Okay, so I always like to, and anybody who maybe was here last time might remember this. I always like to start off by kind of defining what we're talking about, right? Because artificial intelligence is one of these things that can mean a lot of different stuff to a lot of different people. unless you pin it down with something concrete, it ends up meaning nothing at all. And so the conversation that follows is not very useful. So let me offer you like how I think about artificial intelligence, right? I think about it in the following way. I think we should juxtapose it with natural intelligence, right? We should ask, well, what is natural intelligence? What is the thing, that we want to encode or capture in an artificial intelligence? When I think about natural intelligence, I look around and I see us. And that's the only kind of natural intelligence that I really see. So the next question is, well, what's special about us? What is it that's part of us that we want to encode in an AI? And I would argue that what's special about us is that we're decision makers, right? We get to make choices. Those choices impact the world in some meaningful way, right? And so there's a pop culture reference for you on that, right? From Castlevania, right? Dracula says, "What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets." That pile of secrets is the history of choices that man has made. We're decision makers. That's, I think, what we want to encode into an artificial intelligence, the capacity to make decisions. And so I think it's good to think of AI as an automated decision maker, right? And so for the rest of the next 20 minutes or so, while I'm talking, hold that in your memory, right? We're talking about kind of automated decision-making systems of one kind or another, and I struggle to think of any form of artificial intelligence that can't be cast in that way, in one way or another. So to be a little more specific, while I'm talking, I think, think about the following things, right? AI, large language models. These are the things that have really made a splash over the last couple of years, kind of revolutionized the landscape. These are things like ChatGPT and the underlying GPT series of models. Copilot, Claude, Llama. There's lots of open source versions. And lots of different entities. Now, I guess there's DeepSeek as well. I'm sure folks have heard about DeepSeek, right? There's lots of different versions of these floating around. Everybody wants to be in the arms race to produce the best one. So that's one kind of AI you should hold in memory. A second kind would be like reinforcement learning agents. These are things like self-driving cars, right? So lots of people want to build self-driving cars. That's another kind of AI. AlphaStar is the AI that was developed by Google to play like video games and compete with human players, right? Those are extremely hard challenges. And so even though it's kind of a frivolous thing in some sense, the fact that you can build a machine to compete with human players in those environments is a substantial achievement. And then finally, really, all of classical machine learning that goes back 200 years also falls under this aegis, under this umbrella of artificial intelligence. So that's what I'm going to be thinking about, talking about, offering some predictions about over the next 20 minutes. Okay, so here's prediction number one. I think there's a good argument that large language model performance is going to plateau, and plateau fairly quickly. So little background, little history for you here, right? So prior to 2012, every year there was a competition. It was called the ImageNet competition. Some enterprising young researcher gathered millions of images that fell into one of 1,000 categories, like, this is a picture of a cat, this is a picture of a dog. And the competition was to build an AI system that could recognize what was in the images. So 2012 comes along, and the team that won that year did so by a huge margin. They used deep learning techniques to do that. And that kicked off what we call the deep learning revolution, which has kind of been the driving force behind AI ever since. So what enabled the deep learning revolution? A bunch of stuff came together kind of all at once to make that happen. The first thing is we started to have more and more computing power available for less and less money. The second thing is that, we had the internet, right? What does the internet do? The internet is fantastic because it makes huge amounts of human-generated information searchable, grabbable, and puttable into a machine learning model, right, or an AI system. These two things enabled the construction of much bigger models that were far more kind of capable and good at doing their jobs. And then the last bit here that enabled the AI, this part of the deep learning revolution, is advances in the underlying mathematics, right, of deep learning and machine learning, right? So we have a particular machine learning-based paradigm that we use to do AI, deep learning, large language model building, et cetera. Right? So that's all your background. Those are the four things that enabled the deep learning revolution in 2012 and that have continued to enable the growth and capability and size of large language models ever since. But here's the thing. We only have one internet. And although that internet is growing in size, it's not necessarily growing at a great rate in information. So some folks think that we are running out of information, right, in the internet. That is the crucial data source that people at OpenAI, who built ChatGPT, that all the large language models that I just listed a few slides back, that is the crucial data source that informs, right, the building of those models. So in that graph there, that's a very recent research paper, right, where some folks wanted to know, well, how big are the models getting? How much of the information in the internet are they actually using? And what's our projected, kind of future guess as to how this is going to go? The kind of aquamarine linear line at the top there, on the x-axis you've got years, on the y-axis you've got like kind of size, data size. The aquamarine part at the top there is the growth of the internet. Right? So you can see it's growing. The blue curve that's increasing much more rapidly is the amount of that information that's being used by AI models. And what you can see is that very, very soon, those models are going to have used all the information that's available, and they're going to be effectively constrained by the internet. Right? The internet's growth will prevent them from becoming bigger and more capable. And this is the basis for why some folks think that very soon, right, we're going to run out of information to build ever bigger, ever better models. Building a bigger model by itself with more parameters, right, is not effective. That will not solve the problem. That will not make AI more effective or more powerful. You need more information. Now, astute observers will note that the aquamarine line at the top is growing, and even more astute observers might note that the y-axis is logged, right? So it's actually growing exponentially, right? The internet is growing. It's getting big. However, that doesn't mean we're getting a lot of new information. What is the informational content of the 10 billionth cat picture, right? Probably a lot less than the first. So there's just less and less available for these models to hoover up and use, right, to build capacity. Right, so that's my first prediction, that large language models are going to plateau. And the implication of that is there's not going to be any artificial general intelligence or any super intelligence in the near term, despite what Sam Altman at OpenAI says, right? I don't think that there's going to be any super intelligence in the near term. That's prediction number one. Okay, so prediction number two, right? Well, these models, maybe they're not going to get a whole lot better than they already are. And they're pretty damn good now, right? Don't get me wrong. They are pretty good now. They're very effective. They do a lot of tasks very, very well. Anybody who's messed around with ChatGPT even a little bit has some sense of its incredible capacity to do things, right? So they're not going to get a whole lot better. So then what's the next thing that we're going to turn to? I would submit it's going to be this, right? We're going to have to ask ourselves, how can we do more with what we already have? So the really hot term this year in the research community is agentic systems, and it is exactly that. It is the idea of trying to do more with what we already have. Rather than trying to build bigger large language models, bigger foundation models, right? What we want to do instead is leverage those models more effectively to do end-to-end tasks. So the idea here is we want to expand large language models that are the basis of things like ChatGPT, with more capabilities, the ability to do sophisticated reasoning, the ability to plan iteratively over a longer time horizon, the ability to set kind of intermediate level goals that maybe are not, not what you've asked them to do, but they're kind of subtasks that it recognizes it needs to do to achieve what you set it, the goal you set it. Higher level decision making, and maybe even, right, here's the dangerous part, maybe even access to actual levers to pull to affect things in the real world, right? That's the idea behind the agentic system. So this is a generally applicable thing that you could do with a lot of different, right, problem areas. So I'm going to give you one example that I think is, very kind of close to my heart and close to my own background, but that I also think is a great kind of example of the performance potential here, right? So let me present to you the AI scientist, right? So for the last 400 years, all of the advancements, right, that make our lives nice, that have led to ever increasing like standards of living and so on, have been driven in part by the scientific process, right? Where we have theories, we try and gather data, we make hypotheses, right? We figure out if those theories are right or wrong, right? And then we build upon them some more, right? So lots of people, this is extremely difficult, right? You need huge amounts of training to do this effectively, like years and years of training. It's very, very high barrier to entry. You know, having a PhD, I know of the immense pain involved in trying to acquire this kind of expertise. It's makes you real sad sometimes. So it's very, very difficult. And yet, people have wanted to automate this for a long time. And in late 2024, a group of very smart people did a pretty good job using our current AI capabilities, right? So like I said, I'm going to present you the AI scientist. So that figure there on the right is more detailed than we need to go into. This is the essential schematic for how this group of researchers used artificially intelligent systems in the form of large language models to automate the scientific research process. This AI agent that they built does everything from generating ideas to doing a literature review to see if those ideas are actually novel and original, to generating experiments, to writing the code to run those experiments, to grabbing the data, right, off of APIs in the internet, you know, to run the experiments, to writing up a manuscript, right, a publishable manuscript that you could send to a peer-reviewed journal, to even trying to anticipate what the reviewers of that manuscript would say and, you know, thereby revise it, right? So this costs about $15, right? $15 to run this process end to end, to manage the scientific development workflow. And, you know, they got some pretty good results that they view or they assess would pass muster at some of the most prestigious machine learning conferences in the world, right? $15 to generate a new research paper, to manage this incredibly complicated, very difficult workflow. So if you can automate science and discover new things with AI, like what can't you do, right? What can't you do? So the implication here would be that very shortly, sometime this year, I think you're going to see a lot more attempts to build AI systems that can take charge of entire workflows end to end. Right? Not you typing at the computer and saying to ChatGPT, write me an email for X, Y, and Z, but end-to-end complete control of a given workflow. All right, so prediction number one, no AGI, no superintelligence. Prediction number two is we got to do more with what we have, and that's going to lead to a focus on building AI agents that can do this end-to-end workflow management type stuff. So the next question you might ask yourself, the next logical question, let me just check the time and make sure that I'm not going crazy here. The next question you might ask yourself is, okay, so what does this mean for jobs, for labor, for the experience of the American worker, right? What's going to happen? Is this going to be like the Industrial Revolution in the early 19th century where lots of folks lost their jobs? Or is it going to be a little bit more palatable, right, or easy to deal with, to grapple with? So here's my third prediction. Now, I'm going to say a few things before I go into this, right? So first of all, it's always a little dicey to put math up on the slide, but I'm going to do my best. We'll work through it together. That's number one. Number two is when I gave this talk, I gave the version of this talk at the Economic Trends Biz Times event a couple weeks back. And when I did that, right, unbeknownst to me, one of the people immediately preceding me was a macroeconomist PhD from Stanford, right, who is far more capable of speaking on this kind of topic than I am. But turns out he agreed with my conclusions, so I'm going to go ahead and continue anyway, right? Okay, so let me give you my sense of the impact on the labor market, what I think it's going to be. I think it's actually going to be fairly limited. Right? So lots of folks have speculated about this, AI coming for your jobs, right? The software development apocalypse, right? Because AI can write code and so on. I still think it's going to be fairly limited. Let me tell you why. That math up there is a Cobb-Douglas production function. Economists use this to try and gauge what happens when you take labor and you take capital, what kind of output are you going to get? The L up there, the capital L is labor. The capital K is capital. Capital. That's a little redundant, but you get the idea. The beta is like how efficient labor is, right? More beta means more efficient labor. And then the A there is what economists call total factor productivity. They've studied these things for a long time, for 100 years, right? Trying to be able to make predictions about how labor will change, how capital will change, and how this will impact, right, economic growth and things like this. So here's the lens through which I view the impact of AI, right? I think AI probably affects something like this through labor efficiency, right, through beta, or through total factor productivity, through the A. And I think there's two scenarios here. Scenario number one is that the change is slow or it's small. The AI-induced change in those things is slow or it's small. If that happens, then the price of labor is unaffected. Everything's pretty smooth. A lot of people don't lose their jobs, and we just kind of roll on, right? People get kind of more productive, but everybody sort of gets more productive, and we just roll on. That's scenario number one. I think scenario number two is that the change in those things in the efficiency of labor and total effective productivity is large, right, and fast. If that's what happens, if AI creates large, fast change, then the price of labor goes way down. So looking at that Cobb-Douglas function, right, if we get large, fast change, what that's going to mean is that employers can either do more with the same amount of labor, or they can do the same with less labor, right? So if there's large, fast change, they're going to need a lot less labor to do the same. That's when people lose their jobs. That's when there's economic dislocation, right? That's when things get unpleasant for a lot of folks. The question is, which one of these worlds are we heading into, right? That's I think what a lot of people are worried about and are asking about with, when it comes to AI. And let me also say, like, I have friends in Silicon Valley, and they tell me that, in the last 20 years, the gold standard thing that everybody in Silicon Valley wants to do is automate away the white collar job, right? So ChatGPT is a possible step in that direction. All right, so 2 scenarios, right? Let me try and, make a call and substantiate it, right? When I was at the CIA, I was told never to make a call, but I'm gonna make a call, right? So some folks estimate that over the next 10 years, AI is gonna create about a 0.66% increase in total factor productivity. It's going to drive about 1.6% of the GDP growth that we have, and it's gonna impact jobs related to about 5% of the economy. This is actually pretty modest. This is over 10 years. It's actually pretty modest effect. And when I say some, I'm going to go ahead and point to my source here since I'm not an econ PhD. When I say some, I'm quoting Darren Ashimoglu out of MIT, right? He's a Nobel laureate economist and studies this stuff for a living. Right, so that's one bit of information, right? That we might be heading for pretty modest AI-related impacts despite the hype, right? Despite what the OpenAIs of the world tell you, despite adoption by your enterprises and so on and so forth. The second little bit of information I'll give you is that graph on the right there. That's from the World Economic Forum 2025 Jobs Report. And, I can't speak to the veracity of all the, I think it's like 100 pages long in that report, but I did think this was pretty interesting. This is on page 45, I think. So somebody who prepared this report, some of the people who prepared this report thought it would be an interesting idea to ask ChatGPT, hey, what are you good at, right? What kinds of jobs could you do pretty effectively and maybe even replace humans doing, right? So they did this for, I think it was 2,800 different job tasks. And the results of doing that are what you see in that graph, right? So everything that's like brown are job tasks where ChatGPT assessed that it could do those things pretty effectively and maybe replace a person. Everything that's blue are things where ChatGPT thinks it maybe wouldn't do such a good job and could not replace a person. There's kind of, I think, maybe 20-ish large categories that the 2,800 specific job tasks were combined into. And what you can see is that there is no category, right? There's no category where ChatGPT assesses that it could replace every task in that category. And for most categories, for the majority of categories, the majority of the tasks are not replaceable by ChatGPT, right? So the implication there, right? I think it's, that's a little self-referential, but nevertheless, it's interesting, right, to get its own sense of, of its capabilities. And its own sense is that it might be pretty limited, right? It might be pretty limited. Ironically, the category at the very top there, which is hard to read for you all, those are jobs related to AI and machine learning, right? So ChatGPT thinks it'll be real good at replacing people like me, which makes me sad, but what can you do? Okay, so if this is the case, right, data point number one, we have fairly modest impacts on, things like GDP growth and total factor productivity. And data point number two is that lots of job tasks are not easily replaceable with AI capability as it stands. And then point number three, AI capability as it stands is not going to get super much better over the next couple of years. That suggests to me that as a whole, we're really heading into scenario number one here. We're heading into a either relatively slow or relatively small impact on the labor market. And so a relatively smooth, right, transition from a non-AI world to an AI world. Right, trying to be data-driven about that, right? We can talk about that in Q&A if you have more questions. Okay, so those are my 3 predictions, right? Prediction number 1, large language model performance is going to plateau. Prediction number 2, there's going to be a focus on trying to use existing technology to manage end-to-end workflows. Prediction number 3, the impact on labor is going to be relatively limited. So let me leave you all with, Saj would be so mad at me if I didn't do this, right? Let me leave you all with some impression about what's going on MSOE's campus, right? So you have some sense of, what some of your local institutions are, doing and how they're plugged into this AI world. So on campus, that's Dirks Hall, right, where my office is. That's where we do a lot of our AI machine learning related work, our supercomputers in there. So we've got a lot of scientific research going on campus, right? And I am one of, I have lots of really, really talented colleagues, right, who are just as smart, maybe way smarter than I am, right? This is just the work that I'm doing, right? My colleagues are doing work that's just as, kind of related and maybe more interesting, right? So I've got research related to kind of the theoretical performance of artificial intelligence systems, which is that theorem there on the right. I've got work related to trying to prevent artificially intelligent systems from doing bad stuff, right? So this is a graph where we're showing that we can prevent an AI from lying, right? We can manipulate it and prevent it from lying, but still maintain its overall performance. I've got some work related to how do we use AI to build scientific research, right? Models. When you have a big data set, a lot of models you could build. You'll usually only see 1 or 2 of those in print, right? So can we use an AI to make the best choices, pick the best models? I've got some work related to trying to train AIs to build 3D models that we can use for printing, 3D printing. So instead of you spending 30 hours or 40 hours working with CAD software, you type in a sentence. Give me a model of a fire hydrant. And you take that to a printer and you print it. And then I also work with a lot of undergraduates, and so do my colleagues. And we're doing a lot of different projects on different elements of artificial intelligence. Dan mentioned this, but I'll reiterate. We've got some events that we're very proud of on campus that are trying to keep us plugged into, to AI and to move it beyond the realm of scientific research. I love scientific research, but it looks like we can automate me for $15. So we got to find other ways to make ourselves valuable, right? So one of these is Hacksgiving. Dan mentioned this. I love this event. I sponsored this. In 2023, we worked with a small nonprofit called Next Step Clinic, where we aimed at kind of optimizing the patient experience. They work with kids who have mental health needs that they have to have managed and get help with. So we built solutions to help them manage the patient intake process. 2024, we worked with Discovery World. We tried to build solutions to turn Discovery World into Pokemon Go, right? Where you go there with your phone, and instead of seeing fixed static exhibit displays, you can hit a QR code and you can get an exhibit expressed at whatever level you like. You can say, I'm a 5-year-old, please explain this to me. I've got a PhD, right? Explain this to me. So we're really proud of that. That was really, really fun, really interesting. And now we're starting to think about planning Hacksgiving 2025. So if you know of any local nonprofits, right, that have a problem that would be interesting to solve with AI, please connect us. We'd love to, find people to work with. We also have the Super Rosie Super Challenge, right? This is sponsored by NVIDIA. We have an alum at MSOE who's a senior vice president at NVIDIA, and he is very grateful for the education he received from MSOE, and he comes back every year to sponsor a challenge. And basically, the prompt is, students, wow me with something. Do something super cool with artificial intelligence and with the supercomputer that you have on campus. So in 2022, there was a group that did some AI. They built an AI arena to train robotics. In 2023, a group built an AI that could write music. And in 2024, there was a group that built what's called a self-healing retrieval augmented generation system, which is basically an AI that does a good job telling the truth and doesn't make stuff up. So we got these events, right? We're very proud of, and these are both intended to push AI out, into like a larger space than just an intellectual ivory tower on campus. Right. Last thing, right? World's changing real fast. There is a paper repository online, a paper repository online called Archive, where people put preprints of of academic papers. 15,000 papers are pushed to Archive in the CS portion of Archive every month. Every month, 15,000 papers. The world's changing very fast, and you might think if you want to, bring AI into your enterprise, right, use it for stuff, you might need to do some upskilling, you might need to do some learning. MSOE has lots of options to do this, and so we have the Center for Professional Education. I'll refer you to my colleague George, sitting at the head table right here. He can talk to you about that. But there's lots of opportunities to get more into this world if you're interested. So I'm going to stop there. And I'm right on time, right? I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was a terrific presentation, and you really reminded us why we're so blessed to have MSOE in our community. You really contribute in so many ways. And I'm not just saying that because Saj is our president. So thank you. I've also noticed quite a few people snapping pictures of the screen up here. Are we able to share your slides with our members after the program today? Okay, so we'll send those out with the recap tomorrow if people are looking for that. So I'm going to remind you all, short questions, 30 seconds, and please just give us your name at the beginning.
Thank you so much for being here again. I wanted to ask you if you could expand a little bit on one of the elements that I think feeds into what you talked about on point number 1 of the trends regarding the LLMs plateauing. And one of the issues that I had read about was that the way that information is called is becoming more and more self-referential. So that a lot of what's coming through the large language models is information that was generated by large language models.
Yeah, that is a risk, right? That's a danger. Right. So for folks who don't know, right, the way these models are built is you get a whole bunch of documents. You have the model basically encode the documents in a specific kind of way, and then once you've created that representation of the documents, you can then ask the large language model to do stuff with the information that it's learned. So the question then that our questioner just asked is, well, what if those documents are themselves AI generated, right? That does strike me as a risk, right, of these systems becoming too self-referential, right? And I think that exponentially increasing but linear in that graph size of the internet, increase will depend in part on what exactly happens with AI generated content, where it goes, how it's curated, and how it's shunted or not into these models. So I would be willing to bet my life savings that OpenAI and other entities like it, Meta, right, Google, are doing their best to make sure that doesn't happen. Because I think they recognize, just as you did, that no good can come of it just eating its own, at NM we would have said eating its own dog food, right, which is very unpleasant. But that's the basic idea, right? No good can come of it consuming its own information. There's no additional value added, right, in what it understands about the world, right? So my sense is that the companies that build these models are going to work very hard to not have that happen. Yeah.
So along the no good can come of it, where's the economic model that supports AI? We have people investing in stocks that have trillions of dollars of valuation. We have municipalities setting aside good planning to build data centers that are supported for something that, according to even the model, if it moves fast and upsets a lot of jobs, doesn't have a huge impact economically. We've got power plants that are being, prepared for all of the oncoming AI, and it doesn't seem to have the economic benefit locally, globally, whatever. So how does that factor into the decisions?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm a mathematician, right? So I have limited insight into the business end of things here, but I do think that there's going to be a lot of soul searching on how exactly to monetize this effectively over the next little bit, right? And a great example of that is Sam Altman of OpenAI himself, right? So So there are, if you go to, OpenAI's website and you mess around with ChatGPT, you'll notice you can do it for free. You'll notice that if you pay, you can get a better model. And then the question is, well, how much should I charge for the use of this better model, right? So Sam Altman set the price of that at $200 for some number of tokens, for some number of questions, essentially, for the model to answer. And it's turned out that they're actually losing money at that price. So I think there are some definite TBD questions, right, about exactly how to monetize stuff like that. And OpenAI, that's its actual offering. I guess that they go advertising based at some point, just like Google is effectively an advertising platform. Other companies like Apple, right? They I think are betting on the idea that Apple Intelligence, as if we didn't notice it's the same two letters, right? Will have an impact on the sales of its platforms, right? The sales of its iPhones and things like this. But I think it's TBD. I have a non-answer for you. I think it's TBD on what the actual monetization strategy is there. I would be unsurprised, though, if it became like an ad revenue-based kind of thing.
Hi, I'm Tim Hunter. I'm a local consultant here. I've got a money question too. With AI, why do I need my accountant? It seems like AI could do all the accounting I need.
Yeah, hopefully it doesn't make a math mistake, right? I think that's a great question, right? And take accountant out and put whatever you like in the blank, right? I think the answer to that question will be role specific, right? Why do I need AI to drive my car?
There's rules. There's just rules there. It's got to follow. It just seems like.
I think so. So there's a bunch of factors that are going to influence things like this, right? Some industries are heavily regulated, right? And so you can't just naively throw AI at a medical problem, or at a financial services problem, because those are heavily regulated industries. Some places are not going to be quite so heavily regulated, and then the question is going to come down to effectiveness, right? Will AI do a good job at this or not? So a few things, right? First of all, large language models, they have a dubious relationship with the truth, right? And you have to be very careful about the kind of answers that these things generate. So the AI scientist here, in science, we have a very, very, very high standard for truth, right? If you want to publish something, it's got to be correct. And the reason why there's so many boxes and so many arrows, and the reason why it costs $15 to generate something like this instead of like almost $0 like a ChatGPT query costs, is in part to ensure that it does a good job, right? Through iterative checking and things like this. So areas in which the truth is important, right? Areas in which correctness is important are going to be areas in which I think you're going to want to be super careful about, why can't I just give this to AI? Areas where that's less important, where, style wins over substance, right? I think there's a real good argument for, for replacing, people with AI. Incidentally, since you asked about accounting, right? Turns out that a number of these artificially intelligent systems aren't so good at math. And that's because that, you just don't find lots of examples of math in the corpus of documents that were used to train these things. So they don't learn how to add. What they do is they look at, when I have a string of a sequence of characters and it's 2 + 2 equals, almost always I'm going to find 4 on the other side of the equal sign. That's what they learn how to do. They don't learn, the concept of addition, right? And there's been a number of studies into this, right, to substantiate those points. Consequently, as numbers get bigger and as operations get more complicated, AI does just terrible at them. So watch out for, the AI accountant. I'm not sure it's ready for prime time yet.
Thanks for joining us. Over the last 2 years, two things have come to mind with respect to AI that have caught my attention. One is in 2023, when the screenwriters in Hollywood went on strike. One of their demands was protection from AI. And then last year, there was a big hospital in Chicago where the nursing staff went on strike. And again, part of their demands was protection from AI. If you were management, what would you be telling these folks with respect to their concerns, their fears, but also the upside of what AI means or could mean to them, both positively, but also addressing their concerns, their fears?
I think those two groups are actually different. My sense is that the writers and artists strike is sort of a group of people who are like unmanaged, right, independent actors who are in some sense they're like unionized, right? So, so I think that group, they were concerned about their work being used to train these models, right, without giving them any kind of credit or remuneration, and then effectively it replacing them. You know, I'm not sure where the legal challenges, right, have ended up evolving, right, for that group, and where that kind of case stands today. But I think those are legitimate concerns, right? Those are legitimate concerns. If you're a creator and you put things out there into the world, and you know, OpenAI scrapes the internet, grabs all of your information, and uses it to train its model, well, you know, they wouldn't exist but for you, right, and but for the things that you did and created. You know, I think the counter argument there is that in some sense, what OpenAI did, if they did what I just suggested, is no different than what all of us have done over the course of our lives, right? We looked at other examples of what people do, right? What they've done. We incorporated those into our understanding of the world. That's what school is. And then we monetized it by having jobs that leverage the skills we built in school. In some sense, that's not really any different. So I think solving that problem or trying to figure out like what the property rights and intellectual property, you know, boundaries are there, right? One of the things they have to do is distinguish between, you know, what we all do as, you know, people who are learning how to adult and what OpenAI did, right? Conceptually, what's the difference? The nurses, I think there, if I was a manager, I would say, you know, look, the goal here is not to replace you. You are not going to be replaced. There are skills you bring to the table you absolutely cannot replace with AI, like kind of the interpersonal stuff, right? The physicality, right? That sort of thing. The goal instead is to have you have an assistant, right? An assistant that can help you manage the mundane, uninteresting parts of your job where, you know, you don't really want to do that kind of work. You want to shunt that off to somebody else because it's unthinking rote work. So I think that's the use case for AI for that group. It's to have an assistant or a coach. So I view them as different.
This is a business question for MSOE. Given your background in intelligence, what do you, in fact, that MSOE is going to have a cybersecurity course or major. What do you see for MSOE in terms of the future for cybersecurity and as a differentiator to attract students?
Oh man, what a good question. I don't actually teach in that part of the, despite managing the team that did that in AI machine learning at NM, right? I don't actually teach in that part of our program. And nor did I formulate the curricula for it. So I'll give you my take on that real quick. I think one of the key differentiators, or one of the areas I view in cybersecurity as really problematic, is that cybersecurity in general involves lots of data, like big data. At NM, lots of data, very large amounts of information rolling in on a continuous basis that teams couldn't handle. And that's why they were interested in AI and machine learning. So the problem as I view it, is that at the educational level, the people who get training in cybersecurity don't cross over into the AI machine learning data science space. And the people who do AI machine learning data science don't cross over into the cybersecurity space. I think MSOE has a great opportunity here to force those two groups to come together, right? So.
I can't believe I'm the first person to mention or ask about DeepSeek, but what I want to really say is, like, with DeepSeek, I think there's sort of increased transparency in terms of like weights, chain of thought reasoning, and to me it sort of pretends like a democratization, a little bit more of AI, and I'm wondering what that impact might be for the AI labor market. I think, you know, it seems like you're saying maybe agentic systems sort of creators might be the future, or is it working on in-house LLMs that maybe companies are now feeling more empowered to build? What's your prediction for that?
Yeah, I think like if I go here, right? So ChatGPT thinks it can replace me. I'm not sure about that. But, you know, I would say that I think it's very dangerous to have a few giant companies with deep pockets control these things. I don't think that's a good world. I don't think that's good. And at the same time, to train something like the GPT series of models costs a lot of money. It costs, like, I think Sam Altman estimated $100 million to train GPT 3.5, that's a lot of money, right? That's out of reach for, for most places that are not specialized in AI and are not very successful already, right? So I think, so right now it's unclear if DeepSeek effectively stole, right, their weights from other existing large language models. That's unclear. But I think generally speaking, the democratization of these foundation models is a good thing. And the more people that can access them, can build them, can construct them, and so on, the better. I actually left it off, but I think that one of the key things that's going to be happening in the next year as well is what we call distillation, where you've got something like Meta's Llama model, which has about 72 billion parameters in it. Could we produce the same kind of performance with, say, a tenth of that? Right? Because if we can, the model gets far cheaper to build and far cheaper to operate. And it's part of that democratization process. That is, I think, what happened with DeepSeek. I think they figured out a way to distill, larger models and make them more kind of approachable. Super unclear, though, if it really did cost only about $5 million, right? Lots of folks kind of think that maybe they just kind of hid the use of a bunch of NVIDIA GPUs, right, in some way. So might have been more expensive than that. It's not clear that we're that far down the road to democratization. But that's my thought, right? And if, on the AI labor market, if we do get like substantial democratization, then my hope is that you wouldn't see like big tech siphon off all the top talent coming out of PhD schools. I don't think that's healthy either. I think that just creates a self-referential, environment where a few control everything.
So we have 3 people that want to ask questions in just about 2 minutes. So we'll have to have crisp questions and crisp answers.
I want to go back to your definition of AI as decision making, and it seems like it was 2 or 3 decades ago that a computer was taught to play chess, which strikes me as extremely sophisticated decision making. So my question is modern AI just doing that kind of thing on an incredibly larger database and instruction programming, or is there a difference in the kind of thinking that AI is doing today from that first computer that would take on the grandmaster in chess?
So, hot take for a crisp answer, right? If we're talking about within the last 30 years, effectively all AI is basically some sort of optimization on a fixed loss function. So, yeah, I think it's pretty much the same. It's just on a bigger scale.
Okay, mine is related to Black History Month. Early on, we heard about ChatGPT having some inherent biases because not all the information that feeds machine learning and AI reflects reality and all the people that we have in our world. Is there any research or work helping to mitigate those biases?
Yes, absolutely. There is an entire AI safety area, and you'll see this at the big machine learning conferences. One of the submission categories will be AI safety. As part of that AI safety kind of research agenda, right, is exactly the kind of stuff you're talking about. Yeah, I don't know that there are solutions, but there are people actively looking at this.
Hi, I traveled with my young adult daughter recently to Italy, and her ChatGPT was everything on this trip. The chat has named itself, it has started its own Instagram, it gave us all the advice, and it was just so much part of her world. How do we need to adapt to the world our young people are growing up in, where this is part of their norm?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have 11-year-old and a 7-year-old, so believe you me, I'm asking those questions myself, right? My hypothesis, having not thought deeply about this yet, my hypothesis is that that it can't be worse than it already is in some sense, right? So, if we're passing stuff through an AI agent, that's an opportunity to exert some control mechanisms, and maybe it's better than my kid just going on YouTube with his headphones on for 3 hours and looking whatever the hell he wants to, right? Pardon my language. Striking close to home here, right? So I think there's an opportunity there, right, to leverage these platforms as a way to kind of structure, right, what people, as a filter for what people kind of encounter and what young people encounter in particular.